Okay, so this is gonna be the last official lecture, right, for the class. Congratulations, you made it to the end. We're gonna cover the last part, which mostly talk about security planning, security policies, what that looks like. Some of this is gonna be your responsibility in the field. You will have to write security policy, acceptable use policy, business continuity plan, all of those things. So I want to go over some of the terminology explanation. Next week, what I'll do is I'll open the session to final review and also additional lab exercises. So that way you can have more exposure and hands-on if you want to come in. I'll make attendance optional because that's gonna be your choice. If you wanna come in and do the extra lab, you get extra credit. You have some more exposure. I did write a couple more labs. So there will not be a lot of lecture, but I will go over the final review, which the final exam is multiple choice 50 questions. I'm still waiting for the security practice test and I'm hoping that they will give us some result this week. So once that happens, I will activate and I'll send out the announcement for Security Plus, but you're welcome to email me if you want an exam voucher for the Security Plus for this class, okay? So we'll go through the assignments and the notes together, and then I'll go through the lab with you. We're gonna do a little bit of forensic, as some of you will be working on incident response in your position as a specialist. So for chapter 11, it goes over what a security policy would entail. And policy usually just includes all the rules that we have to follow. So some of the rules are operational rules, right? And that's get carried into the IT configuration part. So these are written documents that would lay out everything that you need for the specific, like passwords, how the system should be used, how the wireless network should be used, what kind of, things that we should be using email and so on. So those can be part of the acceptable use policy, and I'll show you some examples shortly. Now, when you look for work, a lot of the times you would see this term included in the specialist position for cybersecurity, which is standard operating procedures. So as I mentioned before, procedures are just step-by-step. Things that we would lay out for the common employee to follow to perform, specific tasks or routines, okay? So SOP, this might come up on certification. This is a way that we can support policy. How are they going to be able to follow the rules? So in the first few questions, the first question asks you, why is security policy important in the organization? It is because it's a way that we can apply administrative control. So when we look at administrative control, that could be for business operations, to make sure that the people are following the rules for the organization. It's also allowing us to manage risk. So our ultimate goal in IT or cybersecurity is to be able to reduce or mitigate the risk. So that's going to allow us to manage the risk and mitigate the risk. So in most places, some of you are familiar with safety training when you start a new job, right? That will work. That is part of the risk management aspect. So in IT, sometimes a new employee will have to go through technical training, how to be safely using their email or accessing the internet or browsing the internet. So that's part of how we can reduce some of the risks as far as phishing and to be able to look out for malware. The administrative control that comes back to what the company is obliged to do as far as compliance and regulation. So if we have sensitive data, like in healthcare, personal identifiable information, that will play into some administrative control and risk management. So security policy is important in that we would be able to upkeep, right, the organizational type of control. So what should the security policy include? So you know that it is a document. Normally, you would have high-level brief statements, right? Sometimes people would include executive summary, but in my opinion, that's not required. There are a lot of different templates that you can use. You can find some templates from SANS, or even this. They can give you some outline of how you can write a security policy. You need to state your goals. So if my security policy is for acceptable use, what's allowed to be used on the system, right? My goals will be clearly stated at the beginning of the policy. In your policy, you need to include standard operation procedures, your SOPs. And this is a way that we can include step-by-step instructions for people on how to follow the rules. So I might have a security policy to classify data, right? And within that, I would have procedures or instruction for technicians and the IT team to be able to classify the data. What would be considered private, how that level settings would be included in the data storage system or server, and so on. So keep in mind that your policy would always include procedures, and they are different things. Any questions? So before we go to the next question, I want to show you an example. And this is a template from SANS. So this is an acceptable use policy, and you can find a lot of different organization technique and style, right? This one has free of use. So SANS, they do a lot of security training, and they even offer a master's degree, very, very expensive. But, you know, they train a lot of different organization and professional. So here you can see that it is a little older, but a lot of the things we can do is we can take some verbiage, we can keep it, we can edit this and make it our own. So you are going to have an overview statement, right? You would put down your company's goal. So you would replace that and state what the acceptable use policy would be. And because we want to state what's allowed, like acceptable use policy would include how you use your password, how you use your media, like your USB, how you use your system. So here you would have an overview and you would state some of the goals. And then down here, you would have a section 2, which is going to be a purpose. What is the purpose of this document, right? It's really placed to protect the employee and to reduce the risk, like what we mentioned before, right? And then the legal aspect, and then the liability with IT services here. Then you would have a section with the scope. So within the scope, you wanted to really address who is your target audience, or who is going to be required to follow these rules. The employees, contractors, consultants, vendors, affiliates. So the targeted people you want to include here, right? And then in the next section is when you go down and you would state your policy. What is allowed and what is not allowed. So I've seen 2, 3 different kinds where they would have a section where it talks about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So here they have a general ownership, some of the network information, then security and proprietary information, how they access the systems, what is allowed, especially when you deal with social media. Can people post sensitive things or not? And you have to state that in the policy. companies are very sensitive about their products and things, so sometimes that is, you know, proprietary to the company, right? And then email attachments, what is not acceptable. And ultimately, we want to state when they violate the rules, what will be the consequences, right? First violation, that could be, you know, HR warning, second violation, and so on. Sometime would be dismissal. So once they read the policy, they would have to sign and acknowledge that they have read and agreed to the policy. Whenever that you have changes in your system, you have to update your policy. It is only effective if you keep it, maintain it, right? You have to maintain it over time. So with that, we would be able to go to the next section. Here's your acceptable use policy. Okay. These are the rules that are stated on how you can properly use the system. So for the purpose of AUP, acceptable use policy, it really defines proper system usage or rules of behavior for employees when using information technology system. And that could be tablets, handheld devices, smart devices, right? Desktop computer in that horizon. So you can be specific on how certain systems are intended to be used. What is allowed on those systems? So some of those systems, we don't allow them to access the internet, right? While other systems, that is allowed, right? So for example, if I have a nursing station, on those tablets, they just have applications and access to maybe patient database, billing applications, or diagnosis applications. I will not allow that system to have internet access, right? If they have internet access, that will be filtered. So we want to control network access for those systems. So when we state it in the rules, we have to follow it up with the configuration on the system and the network. It needs to describe the purpose of those systems, how they can have access to those systems, and the responsibility of the users. And that is very important, right? Not just, you know, how the system is used, but the responsibility of the users when they access the system. So some of that, we have to shift the liability on the employees because they are the one that's interfacing the system, and we want to make sure that they do that safely. And when you're using technical terms, you need to make sure that you have definitions and example. We don't assume that everybody would know what ransomware is, right? What a virus is. Or sometimes we would use acronyms. You need to make sure that you define those things. So we would include, sometimes you would see this in the appendices for the policy, or it is a separate definition page. Any questions? Now, if some of you will pursue your bachelor degree or even your master's degree, just expect that they will ask you to write these things, right? For us, I think I linked some templates on your assignments and notes, but I will be able to provide you with some of the templates and you can take a look at those. It's always good if you do write some, you should put it in your portfolio and you can showcase that to your employers or potential employers. This is an area that they highly look at when they're hiring for security people. Okay, knowing how to create policy and then also configure based on the policy. So some of the things that we need to know for certification and practice. Most organizations apply mandatory vacation policy. This is when we can detect fraud. Some companies will let you carry over your vacation days and be able to use that. Most companies, they would allow you to use it within a year, because we find that a lot of the times when people take vacation is when you would see other people stepping into that role. They would find issues that have been overlooked. So you can detect certain type of behavior this way. So a lot of the times we need to support the mandatory vacation policy. Why is this important for IT? It's really because we need to give people access, and we need to really look at how and what they access. So this is when we normally detect a lot of fraud, right? Because the newcomers, they are coming in, they might be following the rules compared to people who've been there for a long time. They're not doing what they're supposed to, and things can get overlooked. So you can detect issue that way. Separation of duties is very common. This is often referred as SOD. This is the principle that you don't give a single person that responsibility alone. You need to make sure that 2 or more people carry out that responsibility, so that way you can detect when there's fraudulent activity or theft or errors. So this is a very critical area, and these things need to be stated within your general policy. And then for us, least privileges. So you're only gonna give them enough access to perform their assigned task, whether you're using role-based, right, or discretional. But a lot of the times we want to make sure we evaluate that role, what they need and what activities they need to perform. So this principle is very important for security, and this is where the access management tends to fall down. So for number 4, why mandatory vacation, separation of duties, and job rotation and clear desk policy are important in business operation. Number 1, it helps us detect when employees are involved in malicious activity, fraudulent or embezzlement. Because when there are embezzlement, fraudulent, and malicious activity, we would see all of these actions in our system, and that's carried into the logs, right? So if someone is stealing files or information, we would see that. It also helps us detect or prevent fraud, theft, or errors. So when you're looking at SOD, separation of duties, right? When we have 2, 3 people carrying out that same responsibility, they will overlook one another. Now, sometimes you do have people that collaborate and they would commit fraud together, and that is a little bit more. So the auditing aspect after that is important. We always go back and audit activities and files, and that's how we're able to see theft, fraud, or errors. So SOD helps us prevent these things. Job rotation, that help prevents dangerous shortcuts or fraudulent activity as well. So in some cases, you see that you would have developers rotating roles, right? Or management, you see that pretty common, where they would rotate, possibly with shift or even regions. And then the clear desk, this is common in a lot of places, including manufacture. You would see that it would prevent disclosure of sensitive design or data theft. So that way people don't leave the facility with printouts, right? With USBs, with things like that. And with that, we would control print jobs, right? USB connections, and then monitoring. So if you watch Snowden, the movie, right? he had planned out on how he snuck the USB out. It was through the Rubik cubes, right? But they have a clear desk policy. So when you work as a government contractor, a lot of times, you know, in some cases like DOD, you can't even go to the bathroom by yourself when you work in a highly sensitive area, like nuclear plants and things like that. But other cases, and similar in some military facility, right, you can't leave the area carrying things, documents, personal belongings. You check your smartphone in when you walk through the door. I work with a medical facility owner, and that's what they want, right? So nurses and doctors, they have an area where they check in their lockers and things like that. Once they leave that area, right, we have to block the wireless connection. So even if you carry smart devices into some area, you won't be able to connect to the wireless devices, to the network, so you can't have communication. Now, in some cases, you know, people feel like it is a lot to control that, but people don't want data to be leaked, and so that's important for certain operations. And so when you're dealing with data theft and sensitivity and intellectual property, it can get into some gray area. So all of that passed through the legal team. And once the legal team is okay with that, then we make the employee sign all the agreement and the disclaimer. So clear desk policy is common with a lot of sensitive places. Okay, so we talked about least privilege principle. So why is this important for user accounts? So that means that in order to apply this, you need to make sure that your services and applications, right? Applications require services for each of the user or their groups must have the configuration for the least privilege. So that means that I need to make sure I configure permissions and user rights, right? Two different things. Permissions pertain to files and objects, like what they can view, what they can write, save, right? What they can download. Then user rights assignments pertain to system access level, meaning that what kind of application they can install, whether they can change system time. Changing system time is important. It modifies the system time so that way they can maybe trick and change the log information. So sometimes we want to control that. So that means that we need to configure our applications criteria for the user account. So you can create a group, and within that group, you would add the users. Once you add the users, you can allow or deny certain users or groups to certain activities on the system. That's user rights assignments. You can also change permission. We've done a lab where we create files, sorry, text files, and we would add the user account or the groups to the permissions of those files. So for the least privilege, if they don't need to see it, don't allow it, right? Deny, always override, allow. So what we want is if you want the user or the group to access that object, then you would add them to the access control list of that object. Like right-click a folder, go to the security tab under the properties, right? And then add specific group or user to that object. My practice is if you don't want them to have access to the applications, don't put the shortcut or allow that system to be connected to the application. Don't install it, period. And that's usually going back to the least privilege. So if you have the application installed, likely that they might click it out of curiosity, right? Or if you put the actual desktop icon, they might be able to access it. So you can customize the roaming desktop for Windows environment in order to control some of that. And each user would have the profile, and the profile is tied to the security token. So that's important to think about. Okay.
access management is a big thing to handle sometimes when you have lots of users. So set up a container, put the users that have common access in that container and control that group. That's probably more of a streamlined way to do things. And then you have specialized user, then you can customize those. And as far as background check, this is important. In IT, this is a common thing for us. We have access to sensitive data. Whether you work for private sector or public sector, I think the public sector tends to require more background check. They do a lot of credit check along, if you are a service technician, sometime also, driving record check. But background check really identifies some of the characteristic or potential behavior and performance tendency. Now I know that some company would give you psychology tests. So you are going to answer like 50 questions, and then those questions are going to really speak to how you respond to things and what kind of things. But I believe that testing don't really give you 100% accuracy, but some of those they claim that it is pretty good. So, okay. All right. So here it talks about background check information on page 2. So that includes employment history and credit check. State of California, how long can they check your credit and employment? Do you guys know? 7 years, right? Anything beyond 7 is not required. You can put information on there 7 years and back to the most current. Credit check, sometimes with the federal agency, they do dig everything up even prior to the 7 years. So if you have things that might flag, you just need to make sure that you put them on your application. They might find it that way. It's not like you're concealing it, but they will find it, right? If you're looking for DOD, NSA, they will find 7 level out. So, but in general, for employment, if you work for private sector, you only need to disclose 7 years before, right? And you don't have to put everything on your resume and your application. Things that are applicable, that speaks to your job, that's probably the best. Okay. NDA, this is so important, right? When I work with interns for DOD, we have to make sure that they sign this, and most of you will have to sign this. Non-disclosure agreement. When you work at that job, we cannot say things about that job, right? We cannot say things about, their activities, their operations, whatsoever. Some NDAs last a lifetime. Some NDAs only certain years or while you're with them. We cannot disclose it on social media. I've seen people in higher up get fired for this. So make sure that we understand what that is. It's just an agreement between you and the organization, or two people, two entity, that some of the proprietary data and sensitive information does not get disclosed.
Is that what Trump is in trouble for?
Yes. A lot of people are in trouble for this. People tweet when they're not supposed to tweet, right? They put things on social media when it's not supposed to be. So this, you cannot share proprietary information, even in operation, videos, pictures, you name it, right? Once you sign that, I actually signed an NDA for one of the jobs that I cannot talk about it for life, right? So you cannot, right? Even if that company doesn't exist anymore, you sign it, you never know. Someone bought the organization, you never know, right? So it's always good to look at the agreement that you sign, and non-disclosure tells you cannot. A gag order is mostly for the larger operations, like the company itself, right? Compared to NDAs specifically for the individual. So, almost all the IT people that I know work in security sign an NDA. Yeah. And some NDA, you only need to sign it for the time that you're with them. And then some NDA can last longer. So until they declassify the data. So once the data go public, you can speak about it. You see all of these things on movies and things like that, or documentary, right? Yeah, I've worked for a company that had gag order and yeah, it was interesting. Okay. So let's go through the next, oops. There it is. Okay, so we talked about background check, why that's important. Non-disclosure agreement is really to protect proprietary data from being shared, and it's really protecting the organization or the entity that you sign the NDA with. So that means you can't even talk to your family about it sometimes, right? I know some of you had clearance before and you probably have seen stuff like proprietary stuff that you can't talk about. So it is a way for us to protect sensitive information from outsiders, unauthorized individuals. And they also have different clearance levels, so different authorization process. So even if you work within the company, other people should not also doesn't know certain things that you might know. So that's important to keep in mind, right? Like if you're looking at different secret clearance level, some technicians have different level than others, so before you disclose anything, right, you have to really evaluate, and also it's always good if you're not sure, ask your manager. They should be able to advise you, and then go back to your agreement. So onboarding and offboarding process. Onboarding is when we might have new employees or people who need new access. That means that we would be granting them access to the system. So the users would then be granted least privilege, what they're only allowed to do. And then when we're offboarding people, whether they're retiring or they're being dismissed or they have left the company, we are going to remove the user access. So literally, we don't delete the user, okay? Don't mistake this word. We disable the user account. We keep that for a few years. And then if that person doesn't return, then eventually we will remove, but we back up all their data. Because when you delete the user account, it deletes their files with it. And if they encrypt things, it also deletes their encryption keys and all of the things that are correlated to that account. Now, you might need their files for the people who are replacing them, so you would want to disable the account up on the termination of the employee or when they're leaving the organization, right? So that's called offboarding. Any question? Now here it tells you that you can also include exit interview. And then some of this would relate back to their experience and how their working relationship is. But important for the security people, we wanted to look at what would be better for their job as far as, access level and how we can better protect their data, right? So monitoring the social media, Facebook and LinkedIn, there is a way that we can use security tool. It crawls through all of the social media body and it would find that particular email account or that particular user. This is a way that you can quickly find someone if they have tweeted or accessed, even if they sign up, right? But sometimes you will have to monitor their activities. Okay. And then you need to define that in acceptable use policy. And if they have policy violation, that will be considered a response to an incident. So you have to treat it as an incident because it's data leak. Okay, let me move 7 and 8 down, so. Okay, for 9, it says, how should an organization manage supply chain vendor access? What solution allows the organization to have security resilience in supply chain? So we learned that supply chain will involve all the parties that require to go from the time that they make the product until they get the product to the store. So that means that there's manufacturer, there's shipping company, transportation organization, and then you've got, sub vendor, and then you have the main retailer. Like, so if you're looking at somebody like Walmart buy a lot of different products, and they would have different supply chain organizations that they're involved with. So that means that they would limit vendor access to the internal network and data. So for example, Walmart might sell Disney product, right? So Disney would be one of their vendors. Now Disney might need access to the inventory system that would include Disney products. So that way they would know what Walmart needs, which location to send the product to. But it doesn't mean that Disney should have access to the entire database of inventory of other vendors, you see? So I would only give access to Disney for their part in the database, right? It might be a table that would include all Disney products. Now, Walmart might sell other things, right? Like they might sell electronics that are made by other entity, like Samsung or Vizio or HP. So those vendors would then have access to only their product information for supply chain purposes, like shipping, right? And making sure the inventory is upkept with Walmart. And that is really aligned with Walmart's system. So what you see is that making sure that we give vendor enough access so that way they can give us what we need, but at the same time, do not allow them additional access. Okay. So now, a lot of the times, they are connecting to our system through the web, right? Sometimes remote access, but a lot of the time through the web application. Most databases, you use web app to be able to access the data. And so when you're using a lot of different vendor, even for the same product, because if you're looking at like just toilet paper, right? You got all kinds of different brands and they come from different vendors. So that means that even for that same product, we want to make sure that the vendors only see what they need to see and supply what our store needs with, and this can also get carried into like manufacturing and so on. So in manufacturing, sometimes you will have steel company connecting with the actual company to supply steel, so that way they might make frames. Or even if you look at companies that make motorcycle or cars, right? They would need steel, they would need, rubber for tire or tire company access and so on. So you have to really think about how each of these entities can have access, but not be able to overlap or have more access than they need, right? So we really map out access to data and data container, period. Okay, it's a tedious process, but once you establish this, right, it's more of a schematic thing. So in database, a lot of the times we manage it based on how the table is related to another table, and we can control the field of the table and how each of the entity access that field. So fields are like columns in table. Imagine it's like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's a CVS file. So you can create these table with the columns and then allow them access to specific columns or through the web application itself, right? Any question? Okay. So with web application that is gonna be retired, right? When it reaches the end of service life, which is known as EOSL. And when the third party decides that they are gonna retire the application, what should you do to really reduce the risk? Number one, you need to take that data and bring it into the new application. This is always, usually it presents a challenge for us because, you know, sometimes data works with a certain type of system. So you gotta make sure that the data is compatible with the newer system. So you're gonna take the old data and you're gonna archive it, and you're gonna take your currently used data and put it into a new application. Before we do this, before we go live with this, we gotta make sure that we test it. That means that you can isolate system and then making sure that you test this process and it is seamless. Because if you don't, we are gonna run into availability issue, right? If people cannot access data, if system application cannot retrieve the data for the need, so just imagine, right? You go and you're trying to order something online and you can't pull how many of those items or the data, the product information, it's gonna present a problem. Okay. People are gonna lose, retailers gonna lose customers, business are gonna lose customer clients in general. So we are gonna need to migrate the data. So when we say migrate data, we just move data into our new system. We're gonna take the old data and we're gonna archive it. Why? Because we might need to go back and look at historical data. Sometimes they want to re-offer the same product again, right? Because it sells in the past. Or they might want to look at the trend of the sale in that product 10 years ago, right? Like think about Pepsi. They brought back the new Pepsi because they went back and they looked at how much of those Pepsi was selling in the 90s compared to the new Pepsi, right? Same thing with Coca-Cola. They bring back flavors all the time. Restaurants is the same way. So you have to archive the old data and move the currently used data. You need to limit access to the old application gradually. And we say this, you know, it sounds easy, but you would do it in phases. Okay. So we would roll out, let's say, Southern California region, that might be many locations. So if you're looking at Jack in the Box, right? Or, you know, like restaurant chain like that, you need to roll out in phases. That means one location at a time gradually, and we don't do it overnight. So it would take days and times and sometimes years. Okay. This is just gonna, and then we would then look at the patches. And so as you do that, you need to patch your system and making sure, and sometimes that fails and it works. So updates sometimes can cause issues. So we test the updates before we roll the updates, and we gotta make sure. So whenever that you retire, this is why companies sometimes they don't change very quickly, because change require a lot of different planning and effort. And for the security part, we gotta make sure that things don't create risk. And also we don't have data leak. So CIA, that's all you need to remember. Those are your 3 goals in life in security. Any question? Okay, so here it talks about end of life and end of service life, the difference, right? So the end of life is really for product, and end of service life that could be for applications or server systems or system. Just gotta make sure that we patch them. Okay, next is gonna be all the agreements. This sounds like a law class, right? So here is your ISA, Interconnection Security Agreement. This is so critical because I think now most people are going for cybersecurity insurance and they all look at these areas. It's very important that you know what they are for certification and practice purposes. ISA entail technical and security requirements for planning, so it requires security planning, establishing, maintaining, and disconnecting secure connection between two entities. So if you have direct connection with your vendor, like I would have a direct communication channel between my supplier and myself, I would have an ISA. Okay. Then you have service level agreement, your SLA. This is very common. It's an agreement between the company and the vendor for a certain expectation. So if I expect, for example, AWS to provide me a certain type of quality in service, it's stated on my service level agreement. So when you sign for cloud, right, they supply you with SLA. You read that SLA, they will tell you what they secure, what's your responsibility in security, and you know how they're hosting your services and system. Okay. And so you need to include any kind of penalties if they don't meet your expectations, right? So they would tell you if they lose your data or if something happened to your system, this is how much money they're going to compensate, right? Usually it's minimal. So you need to see that area. And then you have MOU or sometime MOA. At MVC, I see this a lot. This is an understanding between two entities for the work that we're going to do. It's a little bit different than SLA. It is less formal. And it's just an agreement with a certain expectation. So let's say that I wanted to contract someone, or let's say I wanted to partner with UCR to do a certain project. Then I would establish an MOU. We both together work toward those goals, right, in that project. And then you have the business partner agreement. This is a detailed relationship between the partners. There's obligations that needs to agree upon and how the profits are divided. So these are often when two companies are joining together, right? And to kind of make some kind of money. So the responsibility and the profits and the losses are divided. Okay, so let's go through number 11. Identify the types of third-party agreement for each of the following scenario. ABC Corporation acquires infrastructure as a service from AWS. That's a cloud product for Amazon Web Service. To assure availability is 99.99999%. We are going to use SLA for a service level agreement. B, a partnership established between Acme Inc. and Biz Corp to maintain and shared healthcare system for their employees. Each company will share 50% of the database maintenance. This is an MOU and a business partner agreement because it covers the costs, and because it's an MOU, they're informally agree to work towards something to supply their employees with healthcare system access. C, two companies collaborate on web application to market their products to the customer, like a marketing application. They will share development costs and sales profit. They need to use a BPA, business partners agreement. Why do we care about this? Well, depending on the type of agreement, we go back to, right, the objective of each of like this. A, we're gonna make sure that we looked at that, and from the security side, we have to make sure there's availability, and then the security responsibility from AWS. This one, access level and risk mitigation. This one, access level and risk mitigation, also to the finance system and the application. So most of the things that happen in business, it ties back to IT and security because we are operation. Any question? Okay, so on the next part, question 12, it asks you, why is data classification important in an organization? It's important that you divide your data into classes. We can't just lump up data as data because there's different type of data. There's data in motion. That means that data goes in and out of the network. For example, I might send an email with an attachment. That's data in motion. And then you might have data at rest. That means that data is being stored and archived. That's not being used. Could be historical data. And then you might have data in use, data that is being currently used in financial system, in e-commerce system, and so on, like database. So if we classify the data to different level and type, we would state that in the policy to make sure that the user understand the value of the data and how to protect sensitive data. So when we have private data that needs to be more protected compared to public data. So it's important that you have a data classification policy and you would state how the data is used, like encrypt data that is highly sensitive, right? And specify what kind of access level for the data that is highly sensitive compared to other level of data. So, and then with that, you would also have procedure on how to encrypt and decrypt those data. Here, I also included the measurement of system for analysis. So we would use tools. A lot of the time we have SIEM, your security information system management type of applications that we would be able to do trending analysis. But you measure your system for performance, right? We saw how we would monitor looking at some of the baselines for performance analysis. We did that before. Okay. So we also need to include the MSA. So here are the things that you need to know about data classification. Okay. You need to identify what kind of data that you're using. Then you need to break it down to groups. So I normally would, just like system, you need to do inventory of your data. What kind of data that you're working with, and then give them the classes. Then with the class, you're going to give them a label, basically name of those classes. Okay. For example, you might have proprietary data that would relate to the ownership of the data. The company owns that data. You have public data that's available to everyone, like things on the website. Confidential data that's intended for a certain group of people. And then private data that this remains private, like personal identifiable information, personal health information becomes private because it's private to the patient. And for the provider, like the health provider, they have some of the data information and how that can be exchanged. So for example, from a doctor to a pharmacy, right, this private data is being sent. Your prescription, when it's sent, it needs to be encrypted by regulation, right? So when that's sent over the network, this class of data needs to use encryption, strong encryption. So if we send it over to the wireless network, we got to make sure our wireless connection configuration is also have encryption, right? Okay, so overall, when we retire the data, when we don't need the data anymore, right? How do we dispose or get rid of the data? There's several ways that we can do this. Number one, we can purge, excuse me. So this is a way that we sanitize the sensitive data. We need to remove them from the device. Zero out all your data. So your server system, the drives on your server system that's no longer used, you need to sanitize them, right? Same thing when we talk about when we retired the system, we would purge. So when we purge, we sanitize. Then another way is to do file shredding. Remove all the remnants of file. And file shredding can be physical and logical. So in physical environment, there are companies that will come and they actually go through your folders, paper files, and they shred them for you. Or you can do it yourself. Logical shredding, we just gotta make sure that we remove all the files where there's no data left. So when you put it into your trash bin or delete it, right click and delete or press the delete button, it doesn't necessarily go away. You know that, right? So we have to purge. And then we can also do wiping where it would be removing the data from the disk. We can do erasing and overriding. So if you right click and delete, you have to override it with new data to that storage space. Otherwise, that data remnant still exists if you have empty space because your disk is dynamically writing. So it puts some over here, some over there. So when you erase, right, it just make those space available for the new file. Then you've got to make sure that the new files get placed there to override it. This was really popular in the 70s and the 80s, right? You've seen where in movies or documentary where when they get rid of files, like when they move military bases, they would put paper files into incinerator. That means that they just burn it, kind of like a fireplace, throw things in there, right? Burn it. So it's a way to destroy all of those files. We don't really use that anymore, right? I think even with shredding, sometimes people can piece things together. So you're going to make sure that you shred it in small pieces. And then paper shredding. And then they have like pulping where you would reduce the shredded paper into smaller components, mash or puree. Because things can be taped together, right? Dumpster diving is still pretty big. So these are the things that we have to do to destroy the data. Now, in data centers, you have servers backing up other servers. So you got to make sure that you map all your data back to all the containers and all the entities. So if you have 1,000 server, we have to look back, right? So when you request, you guys ever had to request a web company when you delete your account, you want them to remove your data, right? See how their responses are. I actually requested a couple companies because my accounts it's on the dark web, right? Because of a couple of leaks. So because there was some vulnerability with a couple of applications, so I had requested the company to, number one, delete my account. Number two, to remove all the data from my account, like retail account, right? All my purchases, my credit card information and all of that. And it took one of the companies 6 months to clear all of that, right? So you can request them. You have to manually be persistent about it. And they would need to go back and delete all of that stuff in their backup system, in their databases, and then eventually get rid of your account. So I received an email later on saying that my account no longer exists, and they provided the proof that it, so. Any question? Okay, let's bring this down. Okay, so for 14, Oh, I forgot to talk about degaussing. You can add that, but I think it's also on the notes. So degaussing, you see some of this, they apply magnets to the drives, right? Especially on the old HDD, hard disk drive. This, when it get magnetized, right, the data is destroyed. That's more of the older way. It's called degaussing. They have machines to do that. And then you got pulverizing, which is a way to physically destroy the media. Okay. So these are the compliance body that you see for certain type of industry. GLBA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, SOX, and HIPAA. I think we're familiar with some of these. SOX is for companies that are publicly trading in the market, Wall Street. HIPAA is for healthcare provider or any entity that have healthcare information, including school like this. So if they provide health services at the facility like this, like, you know, immunization shots or, you know, testings, they would require your healthcare information, or some cases, they also have your healthcare information for insurance purposes, like insurance company for health insurance, that also would be complied to HIPAA. GLBA is for banking and financial systems. So your bank that you see, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, or anytime that they're dealing with transactional for financial system. So that means that they have to protect your privacy, and this is why you regularly receive like notification in email and regular postal mail on your privacy. So the primary purpose of these three compliance body really is to protect the customer or the patient or the client privacy, their sensitive information, and overall investment when you're looking at banking or financial system. HIPAA been updated to the more recent 2020, but it was established in 1996. It mandates organization that has healthcare information must protect healthcare information. And this is why when you go to the pharmacy, you have to stand at a distance so that way you don't hear the private information. When the doctor sends things, and or if your family members want to get your information, you have to authorize that. Say similar to FERPA, right? So they can't just disclose your information to anyone without authorization. Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, your GLBA, Financial Services Modernization Act. This required the privacy rules that financial institution provide customer with privacy notice explaining what they collect and how information is used. So when you receive that piece of paper in the mail, right, it will tell you where your data goes and what they protect, they collect. So in-app advertisement, you know how you can get points or discount or money back for certain things that you use? Well, that's where your data went, right? To third-party app. So when you click activate certain things in your banking app, that can also be exchanged with that particular product. So that way you or your browser or whichever other tech company, right? So in some cases, they would sell that to the third party. For marketing purposes. Sarbanes-Oxley Act, this was established years ago, right, to require that organization that take responsibility in financial reporting with the SEC. This is done quarterly. And it would specifically specify in auditing, identify penalties and non-compliance. So they need to provide financial report. For example, Meta as a company, right? Facebook is on exchange in for stocks. So they need to provide same thing with Tesla financial report. So that way it protect the investment or the investor. Why is this important for us? Well, all of this ties to systems. See? And information and data. So when you take the higher level of security certification like CISSP, SSP, and even for like CISA for auditing, you are required to know specific for these, right? So the two example that you can use for personal health information, this is pretty common, right? Prescription is one, X-ray is the other, medical file, medical history. So when you fill out those paper at the doctor's office, they're required to convert them to digital file, and they need to protect your medical file. If the ones that don't convert that to digital file, they have to make sure that they physically protect your file. So nobody would be able to get access to your file and read your file, right? That's HIPAA. Any question? Okay, so let's see. For 16, you can visit the link there. And on here, you would see a list of organizations that is under investigation. And it is data related for protected data related, right? So these are healthcare providers. And it would list the individuals that are affected at certain facility. And some you can see that is larger than others. Bless you. So the task for this is to visit the site. And I want you to identify, because we live in California, you need to identify one California organization that is impacted. And it will give you the general description of what kind of breach, how individuals are impacted. So let's take this one, Redwood Coast Regional Center, that's up north, right? This happens recently, a few days ago, or actually about 10 days ago. And it was a hacking incident. And their impacted system is a network server. So by regulation, when an incident happened, they have to report it, right? So if you are an incident handling or response specialist for a healthcare organization, right, you have to be able to file this. Because it's also, they have to report locally and also federal when it's hacking incident. But ultimately, you would see this reported. And it's good that we see this as a centralized system compared to before. You do see some others that would be email leak, right? This could be intentional or unintentional, or it could be insider threats. So as a specialist or an analyst, you have to identify, right, whether it's an internal threat or it's an accident. A lot of it is email and also hacking, you see? Here's another one for California, Guardian Health, Inland Physicians Billing Services for California. 77,000 records, right? That was in April. So people ask me if it's going to happen to them, right? It's when it's going to happen to them. This is what makes this job more secure than most technical work. Any question?
The same thing like Kaiser.
You can try to see if Kaiser appear on this list. This list goes all the way back to many years. So these are different organization, yeah, similar to Kaiser, or it could also be just the billing system. Sometime provider. So as you can see, they're all healthcare provider. Hi. Improper disposal. We just talked about this. Paper and films. So they threw away things in the garbage, maybe. That's interesting. Okay, so with that, we're gonna wrap back to incident response plans, your IRP. What is this gonna entail? You need to state all the incident types like hacking, data breach, intentional, unintentional data leak, malware, right? People disclosing things on the phone. All the incidents that could possibly happen. So we have to define what they are and how to handle them. And then within that, we need to include the group of people and roles and what they are to do when incident happens. There might be certain individual that's gonna focus on the computer forensic. Other people might be looking at, finding network forensic. So could be different responsibility and roles in your incident response team. You need to have a communication plan. How are you gonna be able to contact one another in the case of incident? Let's say that if there's ransomware and all your systems are locked or your network is down, how are you gonna be able to communicate? So alternative plan outside of just using smart devices, email. If your email system is down, how are you gonna notify one another, right? And then the reporting requirements. So who are you gonna report to? The police, FBI? In the case of healthcare provider, you saw the entity where we have to submit the report to, right? And then we have to provide procedures, step-by-steps on how to handle the incidents, and we have to practice it. So the exercises, and you have to document the date. In auditing, in some regulation, you are required to have this and also execute at least the drill of it once a year. So for 18, it says Natalie is a cybersecurity incident first responder for ABT Tech Inc. What type of incident should Natalie report and when? And the reason why I put this question is because people always ask me like, oh, when should I contact so and what, right? All security incidents needs to be reported. Malware, attacks, fraudulent, intentional, unintentional, accidental, anything that present any kind of data leak or jeopardize CIA in our system, we report. We report internally, and in the case where it is fraudulent and attacks, this is a cybercrime. This is a criminal activity. So you report it to the local and also national. So in the case of fraudulent, right? But before you do that, you consult your manager and the legal team of your organization, but you report to the internal organization first. Because some cases they wanted to do PR and sometimes they wait a little bit to do PR. So, but when there's a hacking or attack, you report to the FBI. And also the local, because when it becomes, identity identity leak, then we want to also report to the local police. Any questions? No, we're coming up on a break pretty soon, so. I'm gonna move these down, sorry. Let me put it down to the next view. Where you, there we go. I'll put,
What was the, answer for number 17, or 16?
16, you need to look at the page and you need to find the one that says CA and read that roll. And you'll be able to type out your answer. Yep. Okay, so we're gonna touch a little bit on forensic today. Forensic plays a really important role in incident response because forensic is really a way for us to go back and find out what had happened, right? What had happened to that system or that person at that moment in time. And volatility really pertains to your random access memory, your RAM. And your RAM store things temporarily. It requires power to retain the information. So we can find a lot of details on RAM, right? Like what kind of things they access, what kind of application they're running. So we need to understand the order of volatility. And when we collect the evidence, we need to do them in order. We don't collect the evidence directly from that impacted system. So for example, you might have system A, that user is logging onto that system, right? You take an image of it, basically a capture of all the OS and all the application, and you need to follow the order of volatility. We need to collect the evidence with the most volatility point and moving to the least volatility point. Like cache data. Cache data is from a memory location that is temporarily stored on your system, and it goes away when you shut down that computer. When we open things or shutting things down, it changes the system state. So when you're doing forensic on a system, if that system is on, do not shut it down, right? We want to capture that system in its state because there might be things that are running or things that are retained in a certain memory location. So start with cache area and work toward the RAM area and then work toward the drive area. So that's where you go. The most volatility, things that can be going away when the power is off first. So you're gonna go cache, which is within the processor or the RAM. And then moving toward the RAM area, right? So we would capture that image and we would use things that would look at volatility or the RAM examination in forensic. And then we would do file carving with the storage, like permanent storage, your SSD, your hard disk drive. And then we would move to cloud storage, right? Because that is remote and it is retained in another system. Okay? But credential, cookies are stored on RAM, right? Application processes information is stored in RAM. So order of volatility just means that we're gonna move from the area that is highly volatile, and we collect that first and moving outward. And when you collect forensic evidence, you need to follow the chain of custody. This is to make sure that everything is controlled and properly handled. That means that we put down what we access or the evidence that we access, the time, the date, and who. And when it's handled by someone else, that gets documented. This is just to assure that your evidence is gonna be intact and it's not being mishandled or tampered with. We would use a type of form. There are many different templates that are online, so you can create your own form. So simply to state who accessed the evidence, when it was accessed. When you collect the evidence the first time, you document that, right? What kind of evidence? So for the system forensic, we care about what? The system information like model, version, right? Name, and then put the date. So if I'm collecting a desktop or a drive, I will put down the brand, the model, the size information, logical size, physical size, things like that. That is of important to identify what kind of artifact that is or evidence that is. And that is for 27A. Some of you have taken that class before. Any question? Okay, all right, let's stop recording.